Again, with spring kind of coming around, with proms and all that coming up, I wanted to bring you back and talk about some of the serious OUI laws that are out there and people could be facing if they make some bad decisions.
That's true, Jason. And this is something we often see around this time of the year, especially with underage drivers on the road. Underage drinkers find themselves in situations not only with OUIs, but unfortunately, we've seen some very serious accidents that lead to serious injuries, and unfortunately, can sometimes lead to death. And so, as you'd imagine, there are more serious consequences when something like that occurs.
Yeah, and I think people don't really realize that they can be charged in the death of someone in their own car. That it doesn't have to be a pedestrian or someone in another vehicle. It could be a buddy of theirs. It could be someone in the back seat, and they're very serious, obviously, charges that can absolutely ruin a person's life.
It's correct. You can be in a single car accident and have your passenger pass away, and you'd be charged with motor vehicle homicide. And so that's a very serious charge. It's a felony. Most we do see that in district court sometimes, but that quite often gets indicted to superior court where the penalties are that much greater.
And then you can also see charges of OUI, serious bodily injury, OUI leaving the scene if there was something there, and certainly something to kind of warn people about. One, don't drink and drive. Like, that's basic rules. But if something does happen, leaving the scene could be the worst thing you could absolutely do.
Right.
It shouldn't even be an option that runs across people's minds. It's very, very important that you stop and you try to help.
You're absolutely right. And that becomes a very important factor to a sentencing judge, right? In the end, if a person left the scene, that's something we call an aggravating circumstance, right? When a judge is trying to figure out what punishment or penalty, even on a plea agreement, to give somebody, that degree of character is something that stands out. So a person who stayed and did the right thing, that would be a mitigating factor, right? A judge would look at that and perhaps take that into consideration in adopting what we were trying to do. If a person left the scene, didn't take responsibility for it, regardless of them now taking responsibility for it in court, it's probably a reason why, because it's an open and shut case, right? And there's not much we can do.
Right.
So they're being forced to take responsibility for it at that point. We don't have much leverage in that situation. So honesty is a key. Staying, trying to help, regardless of what the situation is, it's only going to get worse if you take off. And they're going to find you. They're going to figure out who it was. There's too many cameras around. There's too many people around. There's cell phone videos. They will eventually find out. And very rarely does it ever happen that someone is not charged in a situation like that.
Yeah, and especially where the worst case scenario you can hear about is, the police finding the car in a couple of days, or maybe at a repair shop, and they see like severe damage, maybe even some other evidence on the car itself. And what makes it so aggravating too can be a situation where that individual may have still been alive while you were at the scene, and maybe the results would have been different. You don't know, but judges certainly hold it against you if that person ends up being deceased, or if a limb ends up lost, and if you called 911 or you just try to do something to help that individual, that goes a long way in terms of sentencing. You're right. It's very difficult to keep the truth hidden forever, and I know people in those situations are obviously anxious, but really it should not be an option in people's minds when you make a mistake.
No, and the hard part there too is we're dealing with somebody who's intoxicated at the moment, right? When that's happening, so it's hard to put yourself in that situation. But you like to think that in a moment of the adrenaline rush of being in that accident or being in that situation, that you would kind of snap out of it and do the right thing. The police look at that as well. I think they obviously are the charging authority. So when it's not a death situation and it's a personal injury situation, there's a difference in the law, with that, where there's two subsections to the serious bodily injury charge. One's a felony and one's a misdemeanor. So depending on how somebody behaved or acted or tried to help at the scene, that may save you a minimum mandatory 6 months in jail. That's the difference between the two statutes. The misdemeanor has no mandatory minimum mandatory jail sentence. So all of that becomes very relevant. Everything factors into how somebody is charged. But the greatest piece of advice is obviously to not drink and drive, not be in that situation in the first place. And that's the ultimate defense to any of this, is to not be there in the first place.
And I think exactly it. Where you have young people, or really people of any age, that may make bad decisions. Pre-planning is very important, to not even put yourself in that situation. If you think there's even a chance, I mean, even how remote it is much cheaper to hire a limo driver, do an Uber, call someone, even no matter how embarrassing that may be, to call your parents. It's much better in that situation, because people will forget and people will forgive. But if you do something and take a life, that's not something that you can really ever get over. Even if you're able to leave prison one day, it's going to absolutely ruin your life, and it's going to have someone lose theirs, right? And that could be a good friend of yours, that could be someone that or just a complete innocent stranger that just wears on you for the rest of your life. So I think people need to be aware to do the pre-planning, and that is always much cheaper than hiring an attorney. But also, it's much better than ruining your life, and you could possibly go into college next year. So you certainly don't want that to kill your bright future.
Right. Yeah, and we've seen it, happen too many times, and just so many tragic situations that could have easily been avoided. And those people all will say the same thing, that they could go back in time. Obviously, they would have made a better decision, or planned better, planned more accordingly. Nobody ever plans to go out and get arrested for drunk driving. Nobody ever plans to go out and get into an accident. But unfortunately, these things happen. But when we put ourselves in a position where we're drinking or ingesting drugs, then these things are possible, and there's consequences for that.
And that's exactly right. Especially with now, where marijuana in itself is very prevalent, and it's the combination with alcohol, that mixture can essentially be another theory to charge people, in terms of like an OUI types of case. So people have to be very careful about what they're putting in their bodies, what other people are giving them, and make good decisions. And if you think that there's a chance, even a chance, that you're going to make a bad decision, make plans beforehand or afterwards. Just don't get in the car. It's the combination of the two that becomes deadly.
Right. It's much easier to deal with being punished for a couple months by your parents versus having to go to court for 2 years and possibly going to jail.
That's exactly right. So we wish everyone a happy prom and a good spring, and hopefully we don't get any calls on this subject. And I'll talk to you soon, John.
All right, Jason, everyone stay safe out there.